He had everything: money, power, control, but no one he could trust. So billionaire Donald Thomas faked his blindness to see who truly cared. His children vanished. His friends plotted. Only one person stayed: Danica West, his poor maid with nothing but faith and kindness. Night after night, she read to him, prayed for him, and believed he couldn't see. But one stormy evening, when she thought he was asleep, Danica whispered a secret that stopped his heart. A truth so pure, so painful, it made the world's richest man realize he'd been blind all along. Because what she said wasn't about greed, it was about love. And by the time he opened his eyes again, it was already too late. Before Donald's test reveals what he truly discovers, make sure to like and subscribe, because what happens next will leave you speechless. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? Have you ever felt invisible to someone who should have seen the real you? Donald didn't sleep that night. Danica's words replayed in his head like an echo he couldn't silence. I can't keep this from him much longer. It's not right. He deserves to know. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, pretending to be blind even in the dark. The line between what was real and what was performance had started to blur. By morning, he'd made up his mind. If Danica was hiding something, he would find out the only way he knew how: by testing her. That day, he dismissed 2 of the housekeepers, claiming he needed a smaller, more trustworthy team. Danica protested softly, saying it wasn't fair to fire people right before the holidays, but he only smiled behind his dark glasses. I trust you'll manage, Ms. West, he said, watching how her shoulders tightened under the weight of that word manage, and she did. From that day on, she became his eyes, his hands, and though he wouldn't admit it, his peace. She guided him through the mansion, describing what she saw: the golden leaves outside, the soft white clouds rolling over the city skyline, the servants rushing to look busy when he entered the room. She read to him in the evenings from her Bible and from the worn-out poetry book she carried in her apron pocket. Her voice was calm, almost musical. Sometimes she hummed while dusting the furniture, soft old hymns that floated through the cold halls like warmth. Donald tested her in small ways at first. He accidentally dropped his silver pen during breakfast. When she stooped to pick it up, he shifted his chair an inch, pretending not to notice. She smiled faintly, placed it back on the table, and said, "You've got good aim for a blind man, sir." He almost laughed. Almost. Later, he spilled his coffee on purpose, watching how she'd react. She didn't scold or sigh. She simply fetched a towel, knelt beside him, and said, "It's just a mess, sir. Easy to clean." Her patience unsettled him. He couldn't remember the last time anyone treated him with quiet respect instead of fear or flattery. But still, he kept pushing. The next afternoon, he invited a few business associates to visit men who once called him friend, but now only called when money was involved. He told them he wanted to hear their voices again. In truth, he wanted to see how Danica behaved around them. The meeting was as hollow as he expected. The men laughed too loudly, spoke too politely, and pitied him too obviously. But when one of them, a smug investor named Craig, joked that a blind billionaire should consider giving up control of his companies, Danica's quiet voice cut through the room. "With all due respect, sir," she said, setting down the tray of drinks, "Mr. Thomas may have lost his sight, but he hasn't lost his mind." The room went silent. The men exchanged looks, embarrassed, then quickly changed the subject. Donald said nothing, but inside, something shifted. After they left, he turned his face toward her and murmured, "You didn't have to defend me." She shrugged. "You didn't need it, but it was the right thing to do." That night, Donald walked through the empty halls of his mansion alone. His reflection followed him from mirror to mirror, man pretending to be blind yet finally seeing more clearly than he had in years. Still, he wasn't done testing her. The next morning, while Danica cleaned the study, he brushed his hand against a porcelain vase, a priceless antique imported from Italy. It toppled to the floor, shattering into a dozen sharp pieces. Danica gasped, spinning around. "Oh, sir." He sat perfectly still, feigning confusion. "What happened?" "I am so sorry," she stammered. Your vase. It fell. He tilted his head. It fell, or you dropped it. She froze, guilt flickering across her face. Then she swallowed and said softly, Maybe both, sir. I'm sorry. I'll clean it right away. He waited for anger, excuses, or maybe tears. But none came. She crouched down, picking up the shards carefully, cutting her fingers on one edge. When he heard her hiss quietly, he spoke again, his voice sharp. You just ruined something worth $10,000. Danica looked up, blood welling on her fingertip, and said something he'd never expected. It's just glass, sir, she whispered. People matter more than things. He said nothing. Couldn't. When she was gone, Donald walked to the study window and stared out at the fading skyline. He wanted to feel victorious to believe the test had proven something. But all he felt was small. That night, alone in his room, he opened a small voice recorder hidden in his desk drawer. His voice was quiet, uncertain. She's either the most naive woman alive, he murmured, or the only one who's ever been real with me. He pressed stop, set the recorder down, and for the first time since faking his blindness, he wished he'd never started this test at all. The days stretched into weeks, and with each one, Donald found it harder to remember which parts of his life were real and which were pretend. Danica's presence had become the rhythm of his days, her voice in the morning, her footsteps in the hall, her soft humming echoing through the empty mansion at dusk. He told himself she was just an employee, nothing more. Yet every time she smiled or scolded him gently for skipping lunch, something inside him softened. Still, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not anymore. He'd been betrayed by people far more polished than her people, who smiled while stealing, who said love and meant leverage. So when he caught fragments of her late-night phone calls drifting through the hall, old paranoia stirred. He never intended to eavesdrop, but the mansion carried sound in strange ways. His blindness made him more attuned to them. One night, as he walked past the kitchen, her voice floated from the laundry room. He doesn't see what's right in front of him, she whispered. Donald froze. He took a cautious step closer, straining to hear more. I wish I could tell him, but I can't. Not yet. His jaw tightened. Tell me what? The old instincts returned, the suspicion, the fear that kindness was just another mask. The next morning, he dismissed 3 more staff members under the pretense of downsizing. Their complaints echoed through the halls, but he ignored them. He told himself it was part of the test. If Danica stays, she's genuine. If she leaves, she's like the rest. She stayed. Even as the workload doubled, even as exhaustion painted shadows under her eyes, she didn't complain. Instead, she sang gospel songs, mostly soft and full of faith. Sometimes he caught the words when she thought he was asleep. Even in darkness, the Lord sees. He wanted to believe that was coincidence, but deep down, it didn't feel like one. One night, he found her asleep in the kitchen, her head resting on her folded arms beside an unfinished list of chores. He stood there for a long time, watching her breathe, then quietly placed a blanket over her shoulders. For a man who had built skyscrapers and commanded empires, that simple act felt like the most human thing he'd done in years. But kindness couldn't silence the voice in his head that whispered, what if she's playing you too? 2 days later, it happened. Danica was cleaning his private study, a place filled with artifacts and trophies from a lifetime of power. Donald sat in his chair, pretending to nap, while secretly observing her reflection in the glass cabinet. She moved carefully, almost reverently, dusting each shelf. But when she reached the center table, her elbow brushed against a tall bronze sculpture, a one-of-a-kind piece from Milan. It toppled, crashing to the floor with a deafening clang. She gasped, spinning toward the sound, and before he could stop himself, before he could remember the lie, Donald turned his head sharply, eyes locking onto hers. The silence that followed was suffocating. Danica froze. Her wide eyes met his, and in that instant, everything she thought she knew about her employer shifted. He saw her see it, the understanding dawning behind her expression, the shock quickly replaced by something softer. She didn't speak. She just knelt, gathered the broken pieces, and whispered, I'm sorry, sir. He wanted to respond, to say something, anything, but his throat closed. So he played the part again, forcing his voice to sound confused. "What happened?" "Just an accident," she murmured. "I'll clean it up." She swept the shards into a dustpan, hands trembling slightly, then left the room without another word. When the door closed behind her, Donald exhaled shakily. His heart pounded like it hadn't in years. He'd been caught, but not exposed. Not yet. That night, he sat alone in his study, surrounded by the echoes of his deception. Outside, the wind howled through the glass walls of the mansion, carrying faint traces of Danica's voice as she said her nightly prayer in the staff quarters. He pulled out his hidden voice recorder and clicked it on. His tone was low, unsteady. "She knows," he said. "I saw it in her eyes. But she's not saying a word. I don't know what she'd do with the truth. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." He paused, staring into the dark. For the first time, he whispered, "I'm the one who's afraid of being seen." He switched off the recorder and leaned back, the silence pressing in. Somewhere down the hall, Danica's voice rose again, soft, calm, unbroken. And though he still didn't trust her, one thing was certain now. The test he had created to expose others was starting to expose him instead. The mansion had grown quieter since the day Danica saw through his lie, yet somehow that silence screamed louder than any confrontation could. Donald pretended everything was normal, the same careful routine, the same cautious voice, the same dark glasses shielding eyes that saw too much. But beneath it all, he waited for the blow that hadn't yet come. Every time Danica entered the room, his chest tightened. Would this be the moment she exposed him? Would this be the day his carefully crafted illusion crumbled? She never mentioned it. She never looked at him any differently. And that scared him more than anything else. Weeks passed, and Donald began to convince himself she hadn't truly noticed. Maybe he'd imagined that flicker of recognition in her eyes. Maybe he could still control the story, until one night, everything changed. He was in his study, sitting by the unlit fireplace, pretending to rest, while the world outside drowned in the whisper of rain. That's when he heard it again, her voice, soft and trembling, drifting through the half-open door from the kitchen. "I can't keep this from him much longer." Danica whispered into her phone. "It's not right. He deserves to know." The words struck him like thunder. Donald froze, his pulse quickening. "She knows. She's going to expose me." He could almost hear the headlines already. "Billionaire lies about blindness. Manipulates staff for loyalty test." He imagined the cameras outside his gate, the outrage online, the board members waiting to dethrone him. And worst of all, he imagined Danica's pity. The woman he'd begun to respect, maybe even trust, would destroy him with the truth. He didn't wait to hear the rest of the call. He turned away, jaw clenched, anger and fear twisting through him like a knife. For the rest of the night, he paced the marble floors, plotting how to regain control. By morning, the answer came to him, cruel and brilliant. He would turn the game back on everyone. That afternoon, Donald summoned his lawyers, his children, and a handful of business partners to the mansion. The atmosphere in the great hall was electric with greed. Rain still drizzled outside, streaking the glass walls like tears. "I've decided," he announced, his voice steady but hollow, "to rewrite my will." Instant silence. "I'm not the man I once was. My sight is gone, and so is my trust. But I'll leave my estate, every cent, to the one who proves they truly care. Whoever stays by my side through this blindness will inherit everything." A murmur rippled through the room. His eldest son, Victor, exchanged a sharp glance with his sister. His lawyer cleared his throat, trying to hide a smirk. Donald caught every reaction, every flicker of greed behind their masks. He wanted to look toward Danica, to see if she'd reveal something too. But she wasn't even in the room. She was in the hallway, quietly folding napkins on a tray, her back straight, her face unreadable. The meeting ended in chaos. Arguments broke out before the ink on the announcement had even dried. His children accused one another of manipulation. His partners whispered about strategy. By sundown, the mansion, once sterile and silent, was alive with the sound of plotting. And through it all, Danica kept working. She didn't ask about the will, didn't join the whispers, didn't even look curious. That night, she brought him tea and asked softly, "Do you need anything else before bed, sir?" Her calm unsettled him. It was as though she could see straight through the storm and into his soul. Hours later, unable to sleep, Donald wandered the hallways. That's when he saw her suitcase, resting quietly beside her door. Half-zipped. He stepped closer, his voice low. "Going somewhere, Miss West?" Danica turned, startled. For a moment, the weight of exhaustion showed in her eyes. Then she straightened her back. "Yes, sir," she said. "Tomorrow morning." "Why?" His voice cracked despite himself. "Is it because of the will? Because of the test?" She hesitated, then met his gaze. "Because I don't want to be part of whatever this is anymore. I came here to work, not to compete for a dying man's money." Her words hit him harder than any accusation could. She turned away before he could answer, quietly zipping her suitcase shut. For the first time, Donald realized the one person he wanted to test was the only person who had already passed. He stood there long after she was gone, the rain outside turning heavier, washing against the glass like a truth he could no longer hide from. And somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard her voice again, faint, steady, and breaking his heart all over again. "It's not right. He deserves to know." This time, Donald didn't doubt it. He just didn't know what it was he was meant to learn. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the glass walls of the mansion, but to Donald Thomas, it felt colder than ever. The house was too still, too hollow, as if Danica's decision to leave had already stripped it of its warmth. He hadn't slept. All night, he'd replayed her words in his head. "I don't want to be part of your test." They struck deeper than any betrayal ever had. For years, he had prided himself on seeing through people, reading their motives, predicting their greed. But Danica West had become the one thing he couldn't decipher. Her silence haunted him more than the lies he'd told. By mid-morning, he made a decision. He couldn't let her walk away carrying the weight of his deception, not when she'd shown him more humanity than anyone else ever had. He found her in the front hall, standing beside her single suitcase, her uniform crisp, her eyes tired, but steady. "Leaving already?" His voice came out softer than intended. Double quotes, "Yes, sir." She didn't look up. "The cab's on its way." Donald hesitated. For once, he had no mask to hide behind. He reached up, removed the dark glasses that had become part of his armor, and set them aside. "Danica," he said quietly, "I can see you." The words hung between them like thunder in a quiet room. She froze, slowly turning toward him. "I'm not blind," he continued. "I never was. I pretended. To test people. To see who truly cared. To know if anyone would stay when there was nothing to gain." Her expression didn't harden. It didn't even change much. If anything, it softened. There was no anger in her eyes, just an exhaustion that came from understanding something too deeply. "I know," she said finally. Donald blinked. "You knew." She nodded. "I saw you watching the sunset last week, out on the terrace. You tilted your head toward the light, not like someone remembering, but like someone seeing." She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "I've known for a while, but I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." Donald's throat tightened. "Then why didn't you say anything? Why stay?" Danica took a small breath, her voice trembling just slightly. "Because I wasn't here for your secrets, Mr. Thomas. I was here for my job. You wanted to pretend to live in darkness. Fine. But that was your burden, not mine." He stepped closer. "Then what were you keeping from me, Danica? That night on the phone, you said, 'I can't keep this from him much longer. He deserves to know.' I heard you." Her brows lifted, a flicker of sadness passing over her face. "That wasn't about you." He frowned, confused. "I was talking to my daughter's school counselor," she said softly. "Maya got accepted into a special art academy, a scholarship. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid you'd think I was distracted, or that I'd quit my job. I didn't want to disappoint you." The truth struck him like a physical blow. All this time, all the suspicion, the scheming, the sleepless nights, had been built on nothing but his own mistrust. She wasn't plotting against him. She was celebrating hope. He sank into the nearest chair, burying his face in his hands. I thought blindness would show me who people were, he whispered. Instead, it showed me who I've become. Danica's footsteps approached slowly. When she spoke, her voice was low but steady. You wanted to test if people could love you without seeing your power. But the truth is, you were the one who forgot how to see. He looked up at her, the woman he had underestimated, tested, and tried to manipulate. And for the first time in years, he felt small, human. I don't deserve your kindness, he said. It's not about deserving, she replied. It's about choosing to be better when you finally see what's broken. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain had stopped outside. The light now streamed through the tall windows, painting gold across the marble floor. Danica picked up her suitcase, but before stepping away, she added quietly, "For what it's worth, Mr. Thomas, I'm glad you can see again. Just make sure you use it right this time." She walked toward the door, her reflection fading in the glass. Donald sat there, motionless, the sound of her departing footsteps echoing like the ticking of time, relentless, unforgiving, yet full of meaning. He had built an empire on control and lost himself in the process. And now, for the first time, he realized the cruel irony. He had been the blind one all along. For 2 days after Danica left, the mansion felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Every sound, the ticking of clocks, the rustle of the curtains, seemed to accuse Donald Thomas of his own emptiness. The silence had weight. The air had guilt. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every echo of her voice haunted him. You wanted to test if people could love you without seeing your power. But the truth is, you were the one who forgot how to see. The words gnawed at him until he couldn't bear it any longer. On the third morning, Donald called the driver and gave one instruction: find her. When he arrived at the small apartment on the edge of town, he almost turned back. He wasn't used to apologizing, not to his family, not to anyone. But when Danica opened the door, her surprise melted into quiet composure, the same steady calm that had always disarmed him. "Mr. Thomas," she said, gently. "You shouldn't have come all this way." "I had to," he replied, his voice rough. "I owe you an apology. One I can't make over the phone." She let him in. The place was small but warm, filled with color, children's sketches on the walls, a soft scent of jasmine tea. It was a world far from his sterile marble empire. He looked around and murmured, "You built a home out of what little you had." Danica smiled faintly. "You build with what's left, not what's lost." Her grace made his chest ache. "I was wrong," he said finally, forcing the words past his pride. "About everything. About you. About what it means to see people. I lied to everyone, but mostly to myself. I wanted to believe I was testing others, but really, I was hiding from my own heart." He took a deep breath. "Let me make it right. I know about Maya's scholarship. Let me pay her tuition, please." Danica's expression tightened. She shook her head. "No, sir. I don't want your money. I never did. It's not money I'm offering," he said softly. "It's gratitude. You reminded me that sight means nothing if your heart is blind. You gave me something I thought I'd lost, faith in people. Please, let me do this for her, for you." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, her shoulders eased. "All right," she whispered, "but not because I need it. Because I understand what it costs you to say those words." He nodded, eyes stinging with unspoken emotion. They sat for a while in quiet, to people from different worlds, bound by a lesson neither had expected to learn. Before he left, Danica said gently, "If you really want to make things right, stop testing people. Stop waiting for them to fail. Trust them, even when it's hard." He managed a smile. "I'll try, though I suspect that's the hardest test of all." "Then start there," she said. That night, back in his empty mansion, Donald sat in his study with a pen and a stack of stationery. For the first time in decades, he began to write letters, one to his ex-wife, one to each of his estranged children, not to justify himself, not to beg for anything, but to tell them what he'd never said when he had the chance. I'm sorry. I love you. I was blind when I thought control was strength. He sealed the envelopes, but never sent them. It wasn't about the replies. It was about release. Weeks passed. The house grew quieter again. But this time, it wasn't loneliness that filled it. It was peace. And then, one morning, Donald woke to a world dimmer than before. He blinked several times, but the edges of everything blurred. The doctor confirmed what his heart already knew. His vision was fading. This time for real. There was no fear in him now, only an odd calm. That evening, he stood by the tall window overlooking the city, watching the sunset melt into gold one last time. The colors faded slowly, swallowed by shadow, but instead of sadness, he felt gratitude. He smiled, whispering to no one in particular, "Maybe this is what it means to see, not with your eyes, but with what's left of your heart." Behind him, the echo of Danica's words seemed to linger like a prayer. Start trusting, even when it's hard. As darkness finally settled in, Donald Thomas closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't observing anymore. He was living. The winter Donald Thomas passed away was the gentlest one the city had seen in years. Snow fell softly over the glass mansion, muffling the noise of the outside world. A fitting silence for a man who had finally learned peace. He died quietly, just as he had lived in his final months, without pretense, without pride. Danica and Maya were by his side. His hand rested in Danica's, frail but warm, and his breathing slowed like a fading melody. The nurses said he smiled in his last moment, a faint curve of the lips, as though he had finally seen something worth smiling for. News of his death spread quickly. The headlines called him a visionary, a titan of industry, a man of legacy, but none of them knew the truth of the man who had died. Not the one who once tested the world, but the one who had finally passed his own test of grace. To the world, he was a billionaire. To Danica, he was simply a man who had learned how to see. A month later, she stood in his lawyer's office, Maya beside her, listening as the will was read aloud. Most of the estate went to charity, as he'd arranged, but one clause made her breath catch. To Miss Danica West, the lawyer read, "I leave my home, the glass mansion, that once stood as a monument to my youth, under one condition, that it be transformed into a school for underprivileged children. A place where young eyes can see the world through art before it blinds them with greed." There was a pause in the room, the weight of the words filling the air like sunlight after a storm. Danica pressed her hand to her mouth. "He meant this," she whispered. "He truly meant it." The lawyer nodded, smiling gently. He even named it, "Ma'am." The Thomas Academy of Light. Tears welled in her eyes. She remembered his voice, raspy but sincere. In one of their last conversations, "You reminded me that sight means nothing if your heart is blind. If I can leave this world seeing even one thing clearly, it's that." Spring arrived, and with it, the mansion began to change. The sterile marble halls that once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and footsteps. The scent of paint and chalk replaced the sterile perfume of polished stone. Rooms that had once displayed sculptures of wealth were now lined with children's drawings, sunbursts, families, trees with hearts carved into their trunks. Maya, radiant and confident, taught her first art class there. Danica watched her daughter guide the children, her voice soft and encouraging, her eyes shining just like her father's once did. The staff that came to work at the academy were not servants, but teachers, mentors, caretakers of something far greater than a fortune, a vision reborn. And every morning, before the first bell, Danica walked through the garden where Donald used to sit with his tea, pretending to be blind. The glass walls gleamed in the sunlight, and the air carried the sound of children laughing. Music to her heart, she stopped beneath the same old oak tree where he had once confessed his regrets. Closing her eyes, she whispered the words that had once changed everything. People matter more. It was her daily prayer, her quiet promise to the man who had once lived in darkness and found his way back to light. Sometimes, when the wind moved just right through the corridors, She swore she could almost hear his voice again, gentle, amused, at peace. You helped me see, Danica. Don't ever let them forget what really matters. And she never did. The Thomas Academy of Light grew beyond anything the newspapers could have imagined. It became a haven for dreamers, a place where forgotten children learned that poverty didn't define their vision, and love wasn't a weakness but a strength. And at the heart of it all, there stood a woman who had once been just a maid, a woman whose kindness turned a mansion of mirrors into a house of hope. The final plaque at the entrance read in his own words, "Donald Thomas pretended to live in darkness to see the truth. But in the end, it was a maid's light that finally opened his eyes." Danica smiled every time she passed it, because now, every morning, when the sun rose and light flooded through the glass, she knew his legacy wasn't in the empire he built, but in the hearts he'd finally learned to see. And for the rest of her life, she made sure that light never dimmed. And that's the end of today's story. Beautiful souls. A billionaire who built an empire, but almost lost his soul, and a widow with nothing but kindness, who became the light that finally opened his eyes. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, for walking through Donald and Danica's story of redemption and grace. Remember, real vision doesn't come from what we see, it comes from how we choose to love when no one is watching. It comes from grace when others deserve judgment. It comes from staying kind in a world that rewards cruelty. Thank you for listening and for being part of Dark Desire Studio. Until next time, keep believing that people matter more than things, and that compassion can heal even the coldest heart, because that kind of love, it changes everything. Always.